The recent conflict between Russia and Ukraine has opened a lot of old political wounds that date back to the days of the Cold War. It's safe to say it's a situation that's changing by the minute. But why is it happening in the first place? What does it mean for the rest of the world? And should we be afraid? Who better to ask than real news anchor / former CIA analyst, our own Buck Sexton. Before we get into what's going on now, can you tell me a little bit of the history between these two countries?
Let's start first with Crimea specifically, right? This is an area, it's sort of an appendage. It's a little peninsula that stretches off of what is now Ukraine, but what was part of the Soviet Union for a long time, and before that was really part of Russia. But if you stretch it back even further than that, it's the result of the Mongol hordes, if you will, the invasion of Genghis Khan that started in Central Asia and made its way all the way across into what is now Europe. And there was a population of these people that are called the Tatars. They are the descendants of Genghis Khan. They're living in this one area that is Crimea. Now, this is an area that is been a constant source of conflict, quite honestly. A lot of wars, a lot of history there. And so it has a lot of resonance today. Who's in charge of this? Who keeps it? Ukraine or Russia?
But see, when I'm watching the news, I hear it's, okay, native Russians and native Ukrainians. I don't hear much about, the Mongolian past per se. So, I mean, this isn't just between two people, the Ukrainians and the Russians. This has a lot of history kind of throughout the entire region.
That's right. Ukraine was a separate kingdom for quite a long time, and then it was consumed. It was brought into Imperial Russia, the Russia of the Tsars. But then what ended up happening is that in the Russian Revolution, which started at the end of towards the end of the First World War, this was an area where known as the White Russians were fighting against the Bolsheviks, were fighting against the guys who became the communist leaders of the entire Soviet Union. And so again, this was an area where there was fighting. Then in the Second World War, what you had was the Nazi invasion. Sebastopol was able to hold out for a long time. The rest of Crimean Peninsula was taken over by the Nazis. And there was a lot of fighting, tremendous bloodshed, very, very sad period. But what happened then, Raj, is that after the Nazis were pushed out, Stalin came in, and you have ethnic Ukrainians there, you speak Ukrainian, you have ethnic Russians there, you have Tatars, who are the descendants of Genghis Khan. Three different people ethnically, all living in this area. Well, guess what? The Tatars were kicked out by Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union. He sent them to essentially Siberia or to camps in that region. And so there was an ethnic cleansing that happened there. Then you get Nikita Khrushchev, who's the leader of the Soviet Union, sometime later, a couple decades later. He takes Ukraine and says, okay, well, the Soviet Union owns all of this, so we have Crimea here, we've got Ukraine here. Why don't we give Crimea to Ukraine? Well, it didn't matter because it was all part of the Soviet Union. But then when the Soviet Union fell, when the Berlin Wall came down, all of a sudden, you had this little area that was part of this other area, and now the Russians are saying, wait a second, who gets to keep this? And Ukraine kept it. Until recently, when we found out that Russia wants it back.
So how important is this, as they say, territorial sovereignty? Do they have any authority to do what they're doing?
What's legitimate and what's not is at the heart of all of these discussions. In 1853, actually, there was a Crimean War that was fought between Turkey, Britain, and France on one side. They actually fought together against the Russians on the other. They were fighting over this one area. Just to give you a sense of how history repeats itself, that was Russia exerting its influence to protect Orthodox Christians in Crimea, because Crimea at that point had come under Ottoman, which is now Turkish, control. So this notion of the Russians saying this area has to be under Russian control to protect Russian-speaking people has been around for centuries. They've done this before. So again, in the Russian mind, this is very important, very powerful.
So Crimea has been in the news for centuries, but specifically what's going on there right now?
What's going on there right now is that you have a government that has fallen in Ukraine proper, all of Ukraine, the government based out of Kiev. That government is gone, the Yanukovych government, he's on the run. Now an interim government has taken its place. We in the West, in Europe, in America, we say, well, we don't like this guy that had to leave. He was corrupt, he was a bad guy, he was becoming a puppet of Russia, or was already a puppet of Russia, depending on who you ask. So we're kind of happy that this happened. But the argument that the Russians give is, hey, wait a second. This guy was elected. He was booted out of office. You can't just do that. So that's where the fight is. It's about the political legitimacy of who's actually supposed to be in charge. And Russia right now has taken one part of Ukraine and said, look, We got Russian-speaking people here. We're going to defend them. We have to keep them safe. And if that means we have to land troops, they're going to do that.
Should other former Soviet nations like Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, should they be worried right now?
They are worried. They're worried because it's not just military force that Russia can exert. It's not just a question of whether Putin's going to roll in some tanks and bring in some soldiers. Russia is a huge exporter of oil and natural gas. Now, especially if you live in certain parts of Europe, like Germany or even the Baltic states, you need that to keep the lights on and to keep your home warm in wintertime. It's very cold over there. The Russians have been willing in the past to turn off that flow, even though it costs them a lot of money, to make a point, to essentially show who's boss. And so they exert a lot of influence. They're big bullies, Raj. They act like bullies, and that's the problem.
So, Buck, what does this mean for Americans?
For us right now in this country, it doesn't mean a whole lot day to day because we're not about to put troops on the ground. No one's saying that at this point in time. That could always change, but it's probably pretty unlikely. So we should be concerned, Raj, but not worried, I think, is where I would put it.
Buck, as always, much appreciated.
Great seeing you, Raj.